Burnout 3 is considered one of the best racing games of all time, and while yeah, that is true, it's a great game, I thought to myself, why is it that the rest of the series is seemingly neglected in these discussions? Some people will bring up Burnout Revenge or Burnout Paradise as contenders. I have my own opinions that I'll share later, but the discussion is almost always kicked off by Burnout 3, and so I wanted to find out for myself if Burnout 3 really is the best in the series, or maybe it just set the standard for the series afterwards, or maybe it's just the most accessible title. I don't know yet. I have so many questions, and in my quest for knowledge, I've decided to play every single Burnout game in chronological order, starting with 2001's Burnout and ending with 2011's Burnout Crash. That brings the total to 9 games, 8 individual unique releases with an additional Nintendo DS port of Burnout Legends. Now, I figured I'm not going to be checking out every single version of every game, but I felt like Burnout Legends on DS has enough differences to warrant its own section, and you'll see that later. Additionally, I'll be playing on the default difficulty with no cheats, mods, downloaded saves, anything like that. Also, at the end of the video, I'll wrap it up real quick with the best games and the worst games, as well as any other closing thoughts I might have. Anyways, I've rambled on for far too long already. My name is Mercy, and I played every Burnout game. Enjoy. Burnout was released on November 1st, 2001 on PS2 and on April 30th, 2002 on GameCube and Xbox. I'll be playing the PS2 version of the game today. Upon first boot, you'll notice the game seems a bit basic. There's no opening cutscene, no introduction, just a simple splash screen and we're in. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but to me, it is an indicator of the game's quality throughout. This Burnout is a very basic, very bare bones, arcade-like experience. The game feels different from pretty much every other Burnout on this list. It's not to say that the physics are terrible, they're just different. I found bobbing and weaving through traffic in this game to be much more difficult than the others, with any slight contact with another car sending you into a crash. The crashes look pretty cool, at least, I think anyways. They're not as crazy or over the top like some of the later games, but really this game feels a lot more grounded in general. I love getting into a wreck and seeing the AI pile in. It just activates something in my brain. I don't know, crashing cars will never not be cool. What's not cool is just how slow this boost meter builds. You may as well not even have one. In the later games, you can use your boost meter as you get it, and it fills up pretty fast. In this game, no. You have to wait until it's completely full to even consider using it. And once you get into one of those wrecks that happens pretty frequently, you lose over half of it. And even when you do fill the gauge, the game doesn't feel much faster than it did without it. I think that's my single biggest problem with the original Burnout game. It just doesn't feel fast. The speedometer says I'm doing over 100 miles per hour, but I feel like I'm doing maybe 60 tops. There's really no blur on the objects around me, no real shake to the camera. The audio doesn't make it seem like I'm going that fast either, with each vehicle's engine just kinda humming along. The soundtrack also doesn't help, with a bunch of odd, mid-tempo, electronic, and rock tracks. And to be clear, I like the songs, they're fine and all, but I wouldn't listen to them outside of the game, and I think that's important. They don't really do anything to elevate the experience like the soundtrack does in the later games. And unfortunately, there really isn't much more to say about Burnout 1. It exists, and ultimately, I would only recommend it to a curious video game enthusiast. The game feels like a budget title, it plays like a budget title, and I don't mean like a modern indie game type budget title, I mean more like a $20 Value City find in 2002. It's just a very bland, bare bones, hollow experience. And here's the thing too, I understand that it's the first entry and a few of Burnout's cornerstone mechanics began in this game, but I still don't recommend it. I had this game as a child and revisiting it didn't invoke any feelings of nostalgia or anything really at all, so I didn't like it then and I don't like it now. I would skip this one. Let's move on to Burnout 2 Point of Impact, which by all metrics is a superior game to the first. Burnout 2 Point of Impact was released on October 3rd, 2002 for PS2, April 8th, 2003 for GameCube, and May 1st, 2003 for Xbox. I'll be playing the PS2 version of the game. Burnout 2 immediately improves on just about every complaint I had from the first game. Let's start with the physics. Burnout 2 feels tighter and more responsive. I had a much easier time pulling off big drifts and dodging traffic in this one. The sense of speed, while at first glance doesn't seem like a huge improvement over the first game, but once you boost, oh yeah, the camera sort of pulls back, the game gets blurry, and the music gets louder. I love it. Speaking of boost, it's much easier to fill your bar now. The game pushes you to take more risks. Near misses, drifting, airtime, and driving into oncoming lanes fills your boost bar much faster than in the first game. Unfortunately, you still can't use your boost whenever you feel like it, but Burnout chaining mitigates just that. Burnout chaining returns from the first game, and using your entire boost bar at once causes it to instantly refill to be used again. It's a cool mechanic that I found to be much more useful in this game, since you'll have boost far more often than in the first one. It makes using your boost more strategic and less of a, oh, I have it now, I need to use it now sort of thing. Wrecks also don't punish you as badly, with only a small bit of your boost bar disappearing after a wreck. Thank you. The wrecks themselves, while not as over the top as the later games, look great. Burnout 2 adds 2 new modes to the mix. The first being Pursuit, where you're a cop pursuing a car. The goal here is to take out the car before the time runs out. It's pretty simple and straightforward, kind of fun for the first few times, but meh. The real star of the show is the other new mode, Crash mode. Oh yeah, this is just as fun as it sounds. The game gives you a car, you drive it into a crowd of cars and try to cause as much carnage as possible. Afterwards, you're given a damage assessment, and depending on how much damage you've caused, that's your score. This is so dumb, but it's so much fun. I love how the AI just completely loses their minds after you wreck and they full send it into the pile of cars. Admittedly, compared to the later games, Crash in this game is bare bones. There's no bonus multipliers or anything like that, but it's still a blast. It's simple, it's fun, and a highlight from Burnout 2. So all in all, what do I think of Burnout 2 Point of Impact? Honestly, I think it's great. It's really fun. I had never played it before this video, and I think I really missed out. And sure, it's not as feature complete as some of the later games in the series, but who cares? It was a blast from start to finish. It's definitely not the best Burnout game, but you can do much, much worse in this series. So yeah, go check out Burnout 2. It's pretty good. Next up, it really needs no introduction, Burnout 3 Takedown. Burnout 3 Takedown was released on September 8th, 2004 for PS2 and Xbox, and I'll be playing the PS2 version of the game. Now, like I said, this game truly needs no introduction. It's easily the most well-known game from the series, and for good reason. From just this opening cutscene alone, you know this is going to be something special. Burnout 3 successfully takes everything from Burnout 2 that worked and cranks it up. I mean, it's faster, angrier, edgier. It's just a better game in every way. Let's start off with the physics. They feel wonderful. The controls are tight and responsive. You're able to make adjustments with ease. Traffic is fairly predictable, and the track layouts facilitate these big drifts and long stretches of straightaway where you can use up your boost meter. Earning boost in this game can be done through the older means like driving into oncoming lanes, hitting big jumps and near misses and drifts, but you can also now perform takedowns. Takedowns are so much fun and add a ton of replay value to Burnout 3. In past games, you were discouraged from wrecking, but the wrecks looked so cool. Now in Burnout 3, taking out your opponents is the most consistent way of not only earning boost, but also extending your boost bar past its initial limit. Yes, every single time you wreck an opponent, your bar not only extends, but also fills back up completely. They've even added a brand new mode to complement the takedowns called Road Rage. It plays out on the same tracks as the racing does, but your sole goal is to reach a certain number of takedowns in a certain amount of time. This is so much fun, and the wrecks are crazy over the top, with a level of destruction my 12-year-old brain could not comprehend. This is one of the best looking games on the PS2. It is absolutely phenomenal, with chunks of metal flying off the cars, broken glass, and sparks flying everywhere. It's insane. Now, the big caveat with this takedown system is that your opponents are now looking to wreck you. They're extremely aggressive and will bump and bang into you repeatedly, but man, I gotta say, I love it. It just adds to the sense of urgency and the intensity of each race. Even if you do wreck, there's always another opportunity to wreck an opponent and get that boost bar right back. But even if you do wreck, it's not potentially over, as Burnout 3 adds another mechanic called Aftertouch. After wrecking, you're given an opportunity to slow down time and then apply Aftertouch. Aftertouch lets you steer the corpse of your car through the air and attempt to wreck other cars as they pass by. If you wreck one car, you won't lose any boost gauge. If you wreck two, you'll actually earn boost even though you wrecked. It's a sick mechanic. Slow-mo is almost always cool. I don't care what it's in. I love it. And I found that during my Burnout 3 playthrough, my boost gauge had some boost more often than not. That helps big time in the sense of speed category. It's so much faster than the first two games. The blur around the screen, the sparks flying off the cars, the flames coming out of the tailpipes, it's awesome. And I think the sound also plays a huge part, with cars whizzing by you, tires squealing as you begin to lose grip, and the music. Oh man, the music of Burnout 3 is legendary. For copyright reasons, I can't play any of it, but it consists of a mix of alt-rock, pop-punk, and metalcore. It's about as early 2000s as I can think of, with bands like My Chemical Romance, Yellowcard, and Newfound Glory all making appearances. I wasn't really a fan of this kind of music before I played Burnout 3, but this game made me a fan for life. I'll go ahead and link a playlist in the description below if you're really interested in the soundtrack. It really is just that good. It's all very upbeat and plods along. It sets the tone that this is a fast and fun game, and it is. seconds. And speaking of fast, the rate at which you unlock things in this game is absolutely insane. It seems like every other event you're unlocking a new car, a new stage, a new event, a new something. But that's not just from completing the event itself, but also from earning lifetime takedowns, lifetime burnout points, and lifetime crash earnings. Lifetime burnout points and lifetime takedowns just come with time. Just playing the game in any of the circuit modes, you will unlock things. To me though, the lifetime crash damage is far more interesting, as they've improved crash mode considerably from the second game. In Burnout 2, crash mode was basically a dice roll, it felt like to me. Hope that you hit the right car and get the right bounce to block traffic, and wait for traffic to pile into you. In Burnout 3, a lot of that is still true, but you now have pickups to straight up add to your score, multiply your score by 2 or by 4, or cut your score in half. It turns crash mode into almost like a puzzle game. Like, not only do I have to worry about who I'm crashing into and where I'm landing, but now I need to make sure I grab the high value pickups and multipliers, while avoiding the one that halves my score. In addition to this, the devs have added what they call a crash breaker. A crash breaker can be activated once a certain number of AI have crashed their cars, and causes you to explode, where you're then able to use aftertouch and steer your car where you need it. Whether that's to grab a multiplier you maybe missed on the first jump, or to enter an intersection you didn't hit the first time. Like I said, it feels like a puzzle game, and the pickups just add another layer of thought and replayability to crash mode. And now that I'm done glazing Burnout 3, what do I not like about it? Well, I mean, there really isn't much to say, but there are two things that stand out to me immediately. First off, some of these races go on for far too long, especially the elimination races. Basically, how this mode works is that after every lap, the last place car is eliminated, and that continues until there's only one car left, hopefully you. Usually you have 5 opponents doing 5 laps, knocking off 1 racer after every lap. Not a huge deal in itself, right? But each lap is over 2 minutes long a piece. It quickly adds up, especially when the other events in Burnout 3 don't go on for longer than 2 to 3 laps. It feels slow, and it's honestly very frustrating when I'm 5 seconds ahead in first for most of the race, just to wreck once late in the run and have to potentially restart the entire event. I just don't really see what the elimination races offer over the other types of circuit racing. That's all. The second thing I had in mind is just how annoying this DJ is. So yeah, the DJ will constantly interrupt the music during your race to tell you about EA's Burnout website that doesn't exist, by the way, anymore, or to make unfunny, cringy jokes. And thankfully, I think even the devs kind of knew this guy was a bit too much, and they do give you an option in the settings to turn him off completely, so thumbs up, thank you devs. So all in all, what do I think of Burnout 3 Takedown? I think it's one of the greatest racing games of all time. I think it came along and absolutely revolutionized the racing genre. I think it flipped it upside down on its head, and it set the standard for years. I think the fact that people are still talking about this game in 2024 and probably beyond is reason alone to put it up into this legendary status. Even if you're not traditionally a fan of racing games, I think there's enough here to keep you engaged. This is one of the best games to introduce someone to the genre with. It is an absolute classic. But now I want to go ahead and move on to the first mobile game in the series, Burnout Legends. Burnout Legends was released on September 13th, 2005 for PSP and November 29th, 2005 for Nintendo DS. I'll be playing both versions today, starting with the PSP. I didn't own Burnout Legends as a kid, and I didn't really know what to expect from a mobile game, but I was pleasantly surprised by this one. It acts as sort of a greatest hits between Burnout 2 and Burnout 3, with tracks, cars, and modes from both. I'd say mechanically it's much more in tune with Burnout 3, with takedowns, aftertouch, crash modes improvements, as well as a majority of songs from Burnout 3's soundtrack, as well as a few originals. When it comes to Burnout 2's content, a few cars, a few tracks, and pursuit mode show up, which was left out of Burnout 3 for whatever reason. The sense of speed is good here. It's not as good as Burnout 3, there's less effects and the visuals aren't as detailed, but I'd say it's better than 2's. The graphics are also a step down, but still I would say they're perfectly fine for PSP. There really isn't much to say about Burnout Legends that wasn't already said about Burnout 3, other than the fact that it is a downgrade, but again, that is to be expected. It's a pretty faithful recreation of the console game on mobile, and I would have loved having this game as a kid. I would have 100%ed it easily. I unfortunately did not have a PSP growing up. I had a DS, and you'll see why this is unfortunate when we take a look at the DS version of Burnout Legends. I mean, what the actual fuck is this? The game was ported by an external studio, and I'm just not even sure what they did or how they made it this bad. The controls are stiff, the sense of speed is on par with the first game, I'd say, or maybe even worse with the frequent slowdowns. And so just a quick note, I did play the game on an emulator at first, but then I switched to an actual DS, and I still experienced some slowdowns. Not nearly as bad as on the emulator, but yeah, I figured I should mention that. All of the licensed music is gone and instead replaced with an OST full of just bit-crushed awfulness. I mean, take a listen to this. it's so bad. I mean, truly the worst part of this game though is the hit detection. They've tried to bring the takedown system over from the PSP version, but often you'll just flat out clip through your opponents or they'll get a random speed boost after you slam into their side. I found the most effective way to take down your opponents is just by ramming them from behind, and to me that lack of variety in the wrecks just isn't as fun. And also, the cars just don't deform or spark up like they do in the other titles. I'm sure it's a limitation of the DS, which I get, but to me this just isn't a great translation of the Burnout formula. Whereas the PSP version is something, like I said, I would have easily 100%ed as a child. The DS version, I just can't see myself playing for longer than an hour or two, so skip this one. So far, we've seen the creation of the series, we've seen one of the greatest Burnouts in Takedown, and one of the worst in Legends on DS, and a few in between. But to me, the next entry in the series is where it truly peaked. Those who know, and those who don't will. This is Burnout Revenge. Burnout Revenge was released on September 13th, 2005 for PS2 and Xbox, and on March 7th, 2006 on Xbox 360. I'll be playing the 360 version of the game. Burnout Revenge takes just about everything that made Burnout 3 great and improves on it in just about every possible way. The controls are tight and responsive just like in Burnout 3, but playing on a quote-unquote next-gen console means better response times, better visuals, and a better frame rate. Personally, I think this is the best looking game in the entire series, and I don't mean just from a pure technical standpoint either, as in 60 FPS, 720p, higher res textures, etc. I love the art direction, and I'm aware that many people don't like the visuals from this era, the blown out bloom and the brown filter and everything, but personally I think it looks stylized and I love it. I like how I can take one glance at a game from this era and know exactly how old it is. The cars, tracks, wrecks, everything in this game looks fantastic to me. The camera shake and blur really add to the sense of speed, and let me just say that this game is fast. You'll have boost far more often than not, with the usual ways of earning boost returning like near misses, drifts, and takedowns, etc. But Burnout Revenge adds a new mechanic called traffic checking. By purposefully wrecking into traffic, you not only build your boost meter, but you add debris to the track to possibly take down your opponents with, earning you even more boost on top of that. In circuit racing or road rage, to me, it's essential that you prioritize checking traffic over dodging it. And this isn't just a way to take out racers behind you either, it's a way to take out those in front of you. In Burnout 3 and Legends, you have to catch up to your target and either smash them into a wall, traffic, or ram them into something from behind with your front end. But Burnout Revenge gives you that extra tool to shove traffic into the other racers at distance, helping you close that gap quicker. The caveat with this whole thing is that you still have to dodge big rigs and buses, as well as any traffic that's not facing the same direction you're going. To me though, this is Burnout Revenge's defining feature and the main reason I find myself coming back to this game again and again and again. In addition to the usual racing modes, Burnout Revenge adds Traffic Attack, a mode centered around that new checking mechanic. You start with 20 seconds on the timer and you have to keep crashing into traffic to keep your score going. I found this mode to be so stupid, but it's so much fun. It's mindless and it's a nice break from the usual twitchiness of the rest of the game. Traffic checking isn't the only thing Revenge has added to the core gameplay, as there's now shortcuts on the tracks too, shown with these bright blue blinking lights. Most of the time, these are a more risky but faster way around the track, and by that I mean not only are they shorter, but some of these shortcuts have you jumping an insane distance, which of course builds your boost meter as well. But if you wreck in one of these, like I said, they are pretty risky, the game will throw you back onto the main circuit. I found it almost impossible to complete some of the time trial events without using shortcuts, but your mileage may vary, maybe I'm just ass, I don't know. Crash mode once again returns, but with some major differences. No longer are there pickups like bonus cash or multipliers like in Burnout 3, but instead there's one simple mechanic, the Crash Breaker. Essentially it's the same thing as Burnout 3's, but unlike that game, it can be used over and over and over again. As more traffic crashes, the bar fills up, and once it hits 100%, it's Crash Breaker time. It'll continue to refill as more and more cars crash, so Crash mode is still a bit of a puzzle game, but to me the solution is not as obvious as it was in Burnout 3. It's not as obvious in the sense that, oh, I see the 4x multiplier, I need to prioritize that over the 2x multiplier, for example. In Burnout Revenge, it's more about recognizing where traffic is flowing next and trying to block it off and create those crashing opportunities. I'm not saying one is better than the other, I enjoy them both for what they are. They're different, and I think that's what keeps the games fresh, especially when you're playing them back to back to back like I am. It's very important. All in all, Burnout Revenge might not be as revolutionary as Burnout 3 was to 2, but I do believe that this is the definitive version of Burnout as a whole. The sense of speed, the wrecks, the features, the unlocks, the soundtrack, which I didn't even mention by the way. It's once again full of bangers from punk, metal, and alternative bands like CKY, Comeback Kid, and MXPX. All I gotta say is I love this kind of music, and I have a link to the soundtrack in the description. To me, this is Burnout at its absolute peak. It took everything that made Burnout 3 great and improved upon it, while adding its own special mark on the franchise. Whether you decide to play this game on PS2, OG Xbox, or the 360, you're gonna have a great time. I highly recommend it. Next up, we have Burnout Dominator, which was released on March 6, 2007 for PS2 and PSP. I'm playing the PS2 version of the game. This was a game I had never played before, and truthfully, I had never even heard of before starting the research for this video. I had zero expectations of it, and going into it, I sort of just thought it was going to be a mobile version of Revenge, kind of in the same way that Legends was a mobile port of 3, kind of. But I was completely wrong, and Burnout Dominator surprised me. Now, Burnout Dominator isn't exactly the most unique or the most revolutionary title in the series. I'd honestly say it plays it safe for most of its runtime. The mechanics are all very familiar, the physics, modes, cars, track layout, soundtrack, all have been established by prior games, and I'm not going to dive too deeply into those things. What I will focus on though is the new stuff, like Burnout Chaining, which returns from the first 2 games. If you remember all the way back to Burnout 2, if you depleted your entire full boost gauge, then it would automatically refill and you'd have a second bar to churn through. This continues until either you wreck, let off the boost, or don't perform enough actions to keep your gauge going. Yeah, so in Dominator, it's not good enough to just hold the boost down. You have to keep drifting, near missing traffic, etc. to keep the chain going. And while this isn't completely new, this hasn't been a feature since the second game, and it's a welcome return. During my playthrough, it became a challenge for me, just trying to see how high I could get my Burnout chain up to, and I managed 20 chains, which was absolutely friggin' insane, and that sense of speed was crazy. Burnout Dominator adds a few modes to the mix to take advantage of this, one being called Maniac. In Maniac, you're trying to perform any kind of action to build up your score, like drifting, near misses, etc. But the key here is to get your Burnout chain higher and higher, as each additional chain adds more to your score. Most of the tracks facilitate this fast-paced, constant use of boost, and it fits the game pretty well. Additional modes exist, like drift challenges, for example, that focus purely on drifting as opposed to everything else like Maniac. They're fine, I suppose, just nothing too unique to talk about, really. Now, Burnout Dominator isn't without its faults, and unfortunately, I think they hold this game back. First off, traffic checking is absent from this title. There is none whatsoever, and that's a shame because I really love how crazy Burnout Revenge is in that regard. I'm just imagining a game with traffic checking and then the Burnout chaining onto it. I mean, it just sounds absolutely crazy. Like, they were this close to putting it together and they decided to go in a different direction. But I can live with that decision even though it's tough, and Dominator is still fun without it. However, Dominator, for whatever reason, does not have crash mode of any kind. I mean, why? This has been an established staple of the franchise since Burnout 2, so where is it? I just don't understand why they decided of all the possible things to omit, crash mode is the one that landed on the chopping block. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But even without crash mode, Burnout Dominator is a fun game. It's not really unique or revolutionary or innovative at all. It plays it very safe, but for me, it was a good game in its own way. It was really fun for a first-time playthrough. I just don't know if I'll be revisiting it anytime soon. Next up, we have the final Burnout in the mainline series, Burnout Paradise, which was released on January 22nd, 2008 for PS3, 360, and PC. I'll be playing the Xbox 360 version of the game. Burnout Paradise was always a game that I never truly cared for. Back when this was new, when I was a teenager, I was pretty upset that the game went with an open world format over the pre-existing linear design. I just thought open world games were a waste of time and not really my vibe, but I went into this playthrough with an open mind, and tastes change over time. This was a brand new fresh save, like I said, so I thought I would just put that out there before I dove into this. Anyways, Burnout Paradise drops you into Paradise City, a coastal city primarily composed of urban environments, but with some rural stretches to the west of the map. It's a nice variety, and I like when the different events take me from one side of the map to the other. Unlike the previous games in the series, Burnout Paradise doesn't have set track layouts, and instead you're able to carve your own path from point A to point B. The game will, however, suggest different turns to take with your car's blinkers, which is a nice touch to not clutter up the UI. Each event in Paradise is triggered by first finding said event, usually at a traffic intersection, then by doing a burnout in that intersection, which is kind of cool, you know. We haven't really needed to do any burnouts up until this point, and it's the series called Burnout, so yeah. Events can range from the usual suspects like racing, road rage, time trial, or new additions like Marked Man. Marked Man is completely unique to Paradise, so basically what happens happens here is you have a set area of the map you need to get to, and the AI will do whatever they can to wreck you before you make it. I like this mode a lot and would seek it out whenever I'd upgrade my license. So in Burnout Paradise, the game starts you with a learner's permit, and by completing events, you work your way up through different lettered licenses, D, C, B, etc. And there's more beyond the letters as well. In addition to progressing your license, more cars will appear in Paradise City as you complete events. So see, in the previous games, you'd acquire a certain number of points, takedowns, whatever, and then bam, the car is unlocked. In Paradise, after the car is shown to be in Paradise City, you have to find it and take it down. After you take it down, the car is selectable in your garage and can be used for whatever event you'd like. That being said, there are events that are catered to your specific car, usually time trials. Completing the time trial in the allotted time will unlock a slightly better version of your car. There are other ways to unlock cars too. For example, destroying all of the billboards in the open world gives you a car. Back in the day, I was more resistant to this sort of gameplay loop, but nowadays I enjoy it for what it is. Changes have been made to Burnout Paradise's boost gauge too, with each car not only having their own stats, but also their own boost gauge variant. Speed boost, for example, works how the boost gauge worked in the first two games, where you can't use your boost until it's full. However, you can chain your boost together for even more speed, but the caveat is these cars are usually the most fragile and best used for racing. Aggression boost is most like Burnout 3's mechanic of building up your bar by performing takedowns, and it increases in size as you take down more opponents. These are better for road rage and showtime, which I'll get to in just a sec. Stunt boost works the most like Dominator's meter, where it builds from drifts and other risky maneuvers and can be used at any time. There are other boost meters too, but I think you get the idea. The point is there's more strategy to this game than I initially thought. Now, what I can't fathom though is Crash mode, once again, is not in this game, and it's been replaced instead with Showtime. Essentially what's going on here is that you're able to turn any stretch of road into a crash junction at any time you feel like it. However, the AI isn't nearly as aggressive as they are in those older games, and so it's up to you to tumble your car through traffic and keep refilling your boost gauge. If you sit still for too long, the game will drain your gauge quickly, so you need to keep tumbling and hitting other cars to keep the event going. Every time you hit a bus, that's an additional multiplier, as well as your distance traveled. It all adds up. The further you travel, the bigger the multiplier. Showtime reminds me more of insurance fraud from Saints Row than it does Crash mode from Burnout. It's disappointing seeing how detailed and gnarly these crashes are, just to have them reduced to basically whatever the hell this is. Imagine a traditional Crash mode with this level of fidelity. It just boggles my mind how they fumbled the bag here. I think my biggest issue with Showtime is just its lack of thought beyond see car, tumble into car. The previous games I had to really think of where I was placing my car. It was a game of trial and error. I had to ask myself, where is the traffic now? Where is it heading? Where are my pickups and multipliers? How can I maximize my score? Even Burnout 2's bare bones basic Crash mode with no pickups at all, no aftertouch, nothing, I feel like had more strategy to it than Showtime. Look, I'm sorry I went on a little mini rant there, but even with that glaring issue, I don't think Burnout Paradise is a bad game. It's really not. I have a much higher opinion of it now versus how I viewed it as a teen. Like I said earlier, tastes change, and I think that Burnout Paradise does a good, sometimes a great job of reinventing the Burnout formula. I view this game in a similar vein to Burnout 3 in the overall series. Like Burnout 3, it drastically changed the gameplay loop in its own way. While Burnout 3 introduced takedowns and aggressive driving to the series, Burnout Paradise introduced the open world, the freedom to drive wherever you wanted. Unfortunately though, Burnout Paradise never got a proper sequel in the same way that 3 did. The formula was never refined or improved upon, and instead we were given the final entry in the Burnout series, Burnout Crash. Burnout Crash was released on Xbox Live Arcade on September 20th, 2011, PlayStation Network on September 21st, 2011, and get this, iPhone on April 15th, 2012. I played the PS3 version of the game. Burnout Crash, as the name implies, is just Crash mode from Burnout. I don't know what they were thinking here. We went from not having Crash mode in the last two games to only having Crash mode. And the thing is, I've never looked at Crash mode as its own thing. I never saw Crash mode as the main course. It's almost like when you go to a restaurant, right? You get a nice, big, juicy steak, and it looks amazing on your plate, you know? It smells good, it has the sear marks, the works, right? Imagine that's the meat of Burnout. That's the circuit racing, the road rage, marked man, all of that good stuff, right? But what pairs well with that big juicy steak? That can't be the only thing you have. Well, maybe some fluffy mashed potatoes on the side or seasoned green beans, something like that. That's how I view Crash mode. And I don't know about you, but for me, I don't want to eat just a plate full of green beans. And the worst part of this whole situation, they're not even good green beans. It's not even a good big old plate of green beans. They're undercooked, they're raw, it's a mishmash of bland flavors and textures, and that in a nutshell is how I feel about Burnout Crash. There just isn't much to say about the game, really. You drive into an intersection, wreck a few cars, maybe blow up a few buildings along the way, and then you're done. Rinse and repeat with a few different maps, some minor variations to the formula, and that's that. First off, I just don't care how this game looks. I don't like the top-down view or the graphics themselves. They sort of look plasticky and cartoony, but not in a very stylized way. It all looks very basic, very flat and uninspired. The car drives itself in the game for the most part. All you're doing is steering it and activating crash breakers when you want to. The game sort of plays itself, and while that's not necessarily a bad thing, I do love games like Angry Birds where I could just jump in and waste a few seconds while I wait in the doctor's office or something, but that's not really what I want out of a console game. And yeah, I understand this is a smaller scale, cheaper title, but it still needs to be engaging. And to me, Burnout Crash lacks enough variety to really pull me in and keep me there. There are different modes in the game like Rush Hour and Pile Up, which change some of the variables like the amount of cars that show up or the time you have to complete the level, but it's just not enough. And to make matters worse, on top of this mediocre gameplay, the game constantly, and I mean constantly, bombards you with interruptions. Whether it's to tell you that a bonus multiplier vehicle is entering the intersection or there's an event happening soon, it will stop gameplay to interrupt you. I think this is Burnout Crash's single biggest issue. It just feels so cheap and so unnecessary. And speaking of unnecessary, the use of music in this game is downright annoying. The original songs are fine, but every time one of those interruptions happen, a licensed song plays. For example, an ambulance will blast Dr. Beat by Miami Sound Machine, or a blizzard on the map will play Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice. I really wish I was making this up, but it's completely real, and since these events that happen on the map are so short, the songs will just abruptly end as the event ends. It ends up feeling cheesy and ultimately cheap, and that's how I view Burnout Crash as a whole experience. It's cheesy, it's cheap, thematically it's all over the place, but ultimately, in the end, you're just going to be crashing into the same looking intersections over and over and over again with the same looking cars over and over and over again. I just cannot recommend Burnout Crash to anybody. It is one of the worst releases in the series and a game I won't be revisiting probably ever. And there you have it. That's every Burnout game reviewed in chronological order. But if you've made it this far, and if you have, thank you. It's time for my personal favorites, as well as my personal least favorites. I'm just going to go ahead and keep it simple and list them off. My top 3 are Burnout Revenge, Burnout 3 Takedown, and Burnout Dominator. But Burnout Paradise is also excellent and a game I'd recommend checking out. It was tough choosing between it and Dominator for third. It was really tough, I do mean that. My bottom 3 are Burnout Legends on DS, Burnout Crash, and Burnout 1. I would avoid all of these. I don't think they're worth seeking out or really wasting any bandwidth on. But enough about my rankings. I want to turn the question on to you guys. What's your favorite Burnout game? Do you have a top 3? Or maybe you just really disagree with everything I've said in this video. I don't know. Leave a comment below. I would love to read your thoughts. I learned a lot while making this video. I learned that Burnout 3 was truly the first great title in the series. I learned that Burnout Paradise is a really good game that I overlooked for really childish reasons. And I learned that Burnout Dominator not only exists, but it's really good. Ultimately, what I learned from making this video is that I really miss Burnout. This video has been a labor of love. It's been very stressful, and I just want to thank everybody for their patience and their continued support of the channel. My name is Mercy. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a good one.